Deadwood has been molded, sculpted, and shaped by fire. Though the physical attributes that make up Deadwood Gulch have not changed, fire has shaped and reshaped the downtown core district. Shortly after the discovery of gold in the fall of 1875, thousands of thrill-seekers, miners, and rabble-rousers poured into Deadwood, setting up a menagerie of stick-built structures along with what would become Main Street. One of the men who came to the camps was J.k.p. Miller, financial speculator and investor.
But J.k.p. Miller was born in upstate New York in 1845. As a youth of about 18, he moved to Montana, spent 10 years in Montana. Shortly after that, he came to the Black Hills, arriving the first week of August of 1876, about 3 days after Wild Bill was shot. He came in a wagon train full of merchandise, along with other people coming from Bismarck to the new gold field. He came as a grocer and a banker. He first did business down at the corner of Wall and Main, where the Celebrity Hotel is today. Did well, became one of the most successful grocers in town and bankers.
Miller, like so many others who came to Deadwood, was mesmerized by the potential this community had to offer and took a gamble on making a life in this town. Within 4 years, Deadwood Gulch was a densely crowded labyrinth, consisting of multi-story, stick-built structures, many of which shared common walls. On the night of September 26, 1879, a fire started in the Empire Bakery near today's Lee Street and quickly spread to the adjacent hardware store and ignited 2 kegs of gunpowder. In an instant, the entire downtown district was engulfed in a glowing inferno of fire. After the smoke cleared, Miller, like many other businessmen of the Gulch, decided to rise above the flames and rebuild Deadwood.
When the fire burned him out, he decided it was time to relocate. He moved his grocery up the street, 2 blocks down from the corner of Lee and Main Street. He could have rebuilt on the Wall Street corner, but he knew where the center of action was in Deadwood. He knew the kind of clientele he wanted to attract, so he moved up the block where he thought the more respectable people were shopping, away from the Badlands, which he'd seen more of down by Wall Street.
Miller secured lots along Upper Main Street and reopened a grocery store. This, however, was just the beginning. Miller truly believed in the economic prosperity that lay in store for Deadwood and began a national campaign to draw investors to Deadwood.
Now, he didn't have enough money to buy a lot of Deadwood property, even at the deflated rates it was in the 1880s, because Deadwood was on hard times after the initial gold rush. So he went east and recruited financiers. Joseph Swift, William Swift, the Pennypackers, the Graham family, lots of names from New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania. Over the years that he worked with financiers in the East, there must have been 20 different people he worked with to invest in Deadwood.
One of Miller's crowning achievements was the construction of the Syndicate Block, a massive 3-story brick and stone edifice that fronted Main Street and ran the entire length of Lee Street. This building and its subsequent businesses became the economic beacon and significant local landmark well after Miller's death in 1891.
Now, the Syndicate Block, when it was constructed with 71 rooms. And it was really 3 stories at a lower business level. The upper, you can go up a few steps to the next business level, then rooms up above. The original design was 71 rooms, but they quickly remodeled. Every time you look at the paper for the Syndicate Block, they're cutting rooms open, they're breaking them off, because different renters or leasers come in.
Over the next 60 years, numerous businesses would grace the walls of the Syndicate, including ABC Business Supply, locally owned and operated by Joseph and Margaret Soletic. In 1954, the Soletics purchased an office equipment and supply business once located in the Syndicate building.
The end of March 1954, and Joe happened to stop across the street from Smokey Jones in the ABC, and before the 2 days were out, our neighbor from Huron, South Dakota was in there, and Smokey wanted to sell his store, and he called me up and said, "I bought a store today, office supplies." But he'd been in the newspaper business at the Daily Plainsman, so anyway, that's how I got here. So he called me up and I said, "Well, I guess, if I have to."
ABC Business Supply became one of the few mainstay businesses to operate year-round from this location. In 1963, the Synletics developed an underground Chinese tunnel tour within the Syndicate Block that became an iconic tourist attraction in Deadwood, drawing in hundreds of visitors every summer.
Kids love to go underneath somewhere, and we charged $1 a family. So it was not very expensive.
2 buildings down from the Syndicate Block was the Livingston Block, better known as Historic Saloon Number 10, owned and operated by Lou and Mary Ann Keene. Their daughter, Louie Lalonde, reminisced about growing up in this area and the summer tourist season.
We had a substantial number of retail stores. Some of them were really little. And in the 70s, there was that kind of that element of a few hippie stores that were in that particular area. ABC, of course, was a very popular spot. Everybody would love to go downstairs and go through the bookstore, but even prior to the 70s, we loved to go down there because the Chinese underground tunnels were set up like a small museum, really, that people could get an idea of some of the artifacts that maybe the Chinese used. And we always looked at the opium pipes and, oh wow, you know, when you're young and curious.
By the 1980s, much of Deadwood's economy was primarily based on tourism, and its aged infrastructure began to falter. Several buildings, including the Ranger Bar and the Lead Deadwood Elementary School, were damaged or lost to fire.
Attention Deadwood Fire 911 responds to 663 Main Street for a report of smoke in the rear of Frontier Drug coming from the basement.
Deadwood Fire Control, Deadwood Engine 1's 10-8.
10-4, Deadwood Engine 1.
Deadwood Fire Control, Engine 1's 1097, Main Street.
Being just elected chief a few nights before, I was at the hospital talking with one of my guys I wanted to serve as captain. I'd just gone into the hospital when the alarm went off. I left the hospital and come down and got the truck.
It was about 7:30, thereabouts. My pager went off. I was working at the bowling alley at the time. We owned the bowling alley.
Then we were at home. Joe was working on picture frames for Sharon because she had put a gallery in the basement, starting that business. And a friend of David's called up and said there's a fire at the Syndicate.
Well, David and I were at Dirty Nelly's having a beer after we got done working at the Sears store over here in our building on Sherman Street. And someone came running in saying the Syndicate building was on fire.
The night of the fire, we had been out doing some last-minute Christmas shopping. So we had stopped at the bar to get a drink before we went home, and there was a small gathering of people, and we were sitting around, and pretty soon the fire department came in and mentioned that we needed to clear the building. There was a fire they felt at that time it was in the drugstore.
What began as a routine fire call quickly escalated into a full-fledged structural fire. As the fire rapidly escalated, outlying fire departments within Lawrence County were paged out to help battle the fire.
Fairly early, paged out lead for mutual aid, put out a second page for us because we had and put it out as a working structure fire. After the initial crew went in and reported what they had, and then my fire blew out on the Lee Street side of the building, I immediately pulled everybody out of the building and recognized that we had more fire than we initially thought, because we had fire in the basement and we had fire on the second floor already.
A master stream was initially set up to suppress the advancement of the fire. However, it had to be relocated onto Main Street due to the intense radiant heat produced by the fire.
One thing I'll never forget, we had the ladder truck on Lee Street set up, flowing water on a master stream, flowing 750 gallons a minute. and we had it faced into the second store window on a straight stream. And it was turning to vapor and evaporating before it made it through the windowsill. 750 gallons a minute. That takes a tremendous amount of BTUs to do that. And it was real frustrating. I looked at that and I said, there's much we can do when we're throwing 750 gallons of water and it's turning to vapor before we can get it into the building.
On the opposite side of the gulch, the intense radiant heat was felt by David and Mary Larson, who owned the W.E. Adams block on Sherman Street.
We opened up the window, I think it was 0 degrees out, and we opened up the big window that's here, and you could feel the heat from the fire coming on your face when you stood by the window.
During the fire, the Larsons' video recorder from their 4th-story apartment window captured some truly amazing footage of the fire, including the falling of the Lee Street wall.
Mike and I were pretty well right in the middle of Lee Street and stuff. And when the wall came down, it came down very quick. I remember that both of us got tossed into the buildings on the unaffected side of the street and stuff, and a little bit shaken up at the time, but there were bricks all over the place.
Word of the fire quickly spread throughout Deadwood, and many spectators and business owners watched in horror as the fire breached and enveloped the adjacent F.L. Thorpe, or j.k.p. Miller building, and M.D.U., Julius Dietken building.
Well, you knew it was not going to be saved because it was just, well, the whole thing just, and especially the apartments upstairs, there was nothing to stop anything.
At one point in time, we had my mother and my father and my brother Gary and Linda and Lori and I were all gathered in the now parking lot for the gallows. And we were all kind of holding hands or hanging on to each other because it was quite clear that the corner of the saloon number 10 had started on fire. And I'll never forget my father saying, well, all our hopes and dreams are about to go up in smoke.
Fire crews established a new water curtain using master streams along the brick and stone firewall that separated the saloon number 10 from the adjacent Dietken building. This area was selected since there was a height difference between the two buildings.
F.L. Thorpe sat a little shorter than the old style, so we had a chance to stop it, keep it off the roof. And that's the only thing that saved us was the firewall at the old style.
Here, firefighters were able to hold the line that ultimately saved saloon number 10 and much of Deadwood's Main Street. In addition to battling the fire, firefighters dealt with near sub-zero conditions, limited water resources, and freezing fire hoses.
It was a little bit above zero. I remember somebody saying that. And of course, people who weren't either close to the fire or something were freezing cold. Bud Coburn was manning the truck that serviced us and stuff, and he'd come down every now and then, and I said, "What are you doing here?" He says, "I'm warming up."
Summit was working up at Homestake and had one of those big power sprayers that's on a scraper. Well, that was great, but by the time it got down here, all the lines were frozen and we couldn't get any of the water out of there, so we basically had a 20,000 gallon ice cube.
By night's end, it took 500,000 gallons of water, 250 firefighters from 16 Lawrence County and Pennington County fire departments 6 hours to extinguish the fire. Some of the first images of the fire's aftermath were almost surreal, including the ice-encased saloon number 10, where firefighters held the fire line throughout the evening. The exterior of the building was encased in ice and looked like an ice castle. Louis Lalonde reminisces about going into the basement of the bar after the fire.
So I was snooping around and went down into the basement, and at that point in time we had everything pretty much in one room with the liquor and all of our t-shirts, and we bagged all the t-shirts. And so when I got down there, it was hilarious because on top of the 3 feet of water that was in the basement were all of these t-shirts that were floating around.
The fire destroyed 3 prominent buildings, 10 businesses, and left 100 people unemployed. South Dakota Governor George S. Mickelson was en route to Belle Fourche as part of the Capital for a day when he learned about the fire and met Mayor Tom Blair to discuss options for the city.
Governor Mickelson was going to Belle Fourche that day for Capital for a day, and when I got a hold of him and talked to him just briefly that morning, he said, "I will be in Deadwood at 1. Can we meet?" Obviously we did.
Well, I've instructed my staff to begin looking at what funding and planning assistance would be available for the city of Deadwood to make sure that we do everything we possibly can to see that in the restoration and rebuilding of that area, perhaps there's something unique we can do to restore historical Deadwood. And it's an idea that I have had for some time. Didn't know that this opportunity might present itself, but it might be a positive outcome for a very negative event there in Deadwood.
3 days after the fire, the Lawrence County Centennial newspaper ran a special edition recapping the fire and its aftermath. In the center of the special edition paper was Mayor Tom Blair's letter of thanks to all individuals who helped in the fire.
I write this letter with mixed emotions, a feeling of sadness and a loss which are tempered by feelings of gratitude and resolve. A loss forever as a part of our history, a legacy we are only to hold in trust for generations to come. Along with those dark clouds of loss, we have a silver lining of thanks. To try to list everyone would certainly leave someone off the list. But I do wish to thank all the firemen, policemen, and reserves. The last few days have been hectic, but I finished this letter a week away from Christmas. I can testify that Christmas spirit is alive and well here in South Dakota.
Despite the tragic loss of historic buildings and jobs, a grassroots movement was already in place to stimulate Deadwood's local economy through the introduction of limited stakes gaming. Known as the You Bet Committee, revenues generated through gaming would be used to restore and preserve Deadwood's unique history. Former You Bet Committee member Mary Larson explains.
We were working on that at that time. We had formed a committee. And actually, I would say that this fire couldn't have been more timely because it just pushed us over the edge where we could tell people, look, Deadwood is losing buildings, it's burning down, we don't have the proper equipment to fight fires. We have to do something or we're going to lose our whole community. And I think Deadwood's very important to people across the state. It's kind of the playground of Sioux Falls and some of the people in the eastern part of the state. And I think that that's why we got the sympathy of the public.
The You Bet Committee utilized a portion of the video footage captured by David and Mary Larson to develop a powerful 30-second campaign video for Amendment B, ratifying the limited stakes gaming in Deadwood.
In our advertising, in our campaign, if anybody remembers the old things that said you can let Deadwood live or you can let Deadwood die, and the wall comes tumbling down, and it was heart-wrenching.
Wild Bill Hickok and Calamity Jane walked these streets. Preacher Smith converted sinners. Poker Alice whipped the miners at the card tables. That's historic Deadwood, the same Deadwood we're trying to save. Amendment B will help fund restoration, and it's the only way enough money can be raised. November 8th, you vote on the future of Deadwood. Vote yes on Amendment B, and this town will live. Or you can vote to let Deadwood die.
The video advertisement successfully worked and helped to ratify limited stakes gaming in Deadwood during the 1988 South Dakota general election. 9 months later, at high noon on November 1st, 1989, Deadwood's second gold rush began through sanctioned, legalized gaming. In some respects, the second gold rush owes its gratitude toward the vision of j.k.p. Miller and the subsequent loss of the Syndicate Block, as explained by Dr. David Wolf.
So here we have the Syndicate Block in 1888 being the driving engine of bringing Deadwood out of the economic slump of the 1880s. And then we have the Syndicate Block again being this key engine driving the new gaming economy we have today. So the building did its job twice.
As Deadwood moves forward toward the future, the Syndicate Block Fire continues to be one of Deadwood's defining moments that ultimately shape the course of this community.